Thank you. I appreciate, you don't know how much I appreciate your support, my friends. I'm Tom, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Tom. And I'm here this weekend to sell you on inner spirituality. And it's really important to know why this is so important to me. I've known an awful lot of wonderful people in my lifetime who have so much love and so much goodness inside of them, but they find it so difficult to express it in their lives. As a Catholic priest, as a Jesuit, I buried over 40 young people between the ages of 16 and 30 who've all come to see me at a different time to ask for help, but wanted to do it their way. They were trying to be the best person they could be, but they died in suicide, accidents. Phoenix fell into the canals. They were good people in this crazy world. And you know, our world is a lot crazier than most of us will admit. We've just gotten so used to it. I've had over 600 weddings that I've witnessed. I prepare the young couple. You know, they're in love. They look at each other with stars and they're filled with so many dreams. I witness their marriage ceremony and then I watch. And so many of them, at best, if they make it, they just adjust to each other. I look at the middle-age crisis. You know, I recently was at a wedding in Phoenix, went to a friend's. You know, now, in the old days, I loved receptions. Today, I shy away from wedding receptions. But I went to the wedding reception, and I spent 4 hours listening to middle-aged professional people ask me, what's it all about? Older people. So many that I know that are supposed to be in the golden years. They're supposed to be living the life of a reward of a life well spent, and instead filled with loneliness and anxieties and fears. So many people in this world that are so good and so much love inside of them, but all they're doing is surviving. You know, life is difficult and then you die. I think life can be so much more. See, life is filled with problems, but insanity is when they're the same problems. And so what I want to begin with is to make the difference, and especially at a time like this, because a lot of you are here with issues of religion, issues of God. There's a tremendous difference between spirituality and religion. For a person to be religious, it means they belong to an institutional church. They believe in doctrines and dogmas. They go to prescribed liturgies or prayer meetings. They read the scriptures. To be spiritual means that a person's at peace with themselves. They found a personal God, and they're at peace with the people around them. But I've known, as a priest, I've known many people that are very religious. They know the scriptures by heart. They go to church all the time. They're very religious. They're very pious. But they've never found a peace inside. They're not spiritual. In the same way, I've known many people in my lifetime who are very, very spiritual people, who have found that inner peace, and they haven't been in a church for years. So it's very important to know that distinction. And what I ask from you this weekend are 3 attitudes. And the most important attitude is honesty. Honesty with self. That's the crucial issue. That's why you're paying so much money to be here, to learn honesty. Because most of us have spent our whole lives blaming other people, knowing the weaknesses of others much more than our own. It's kind of one of those things that if we ever admitted anything was wrong with us, we'd have to admit everything that was wrong with us. So we spent our whole lives looking at the weaknesses of others and not our own. Honesty is crucial. I've been on this program for 10 years. And I know today that I'm a lot crazier than the first day I got sober. It's not that I've gotten crazy in this program, I've just gotten a lot more honest. I want to talk about what I've discovered about myself. See, when I was drinking, I never had a clue in the world that I was a compulsive person. If you would have told me I was compulsive, I would have laughed at you because I was so mellow. Nothing bothered me. But I discovered it quickly in sobriety. After 4 months of sobriety, when I got sober, I weighed 170 pounds. 4 months of sobriety, I gained to 220 pounds. And nobody ever saw me eating. You know, it's one of those things, glands. When you get sober, your glands change. But I became a closet sweet eater, just like I was a closet drinker. All the characteristics I had for drinking, I changed to sweets. Dessert time had come along, and they'd ask, they had beautiful German chocolate cake or ice cream, and no thanks, not tonight, too many calories. And then everybody would go to bed, and I'd be like Sherman's March Through the South. I'd hit everything that was sweet in the kitchen. In my drinking days, I'd visit people during their drinking hours. In my sober days, I visited people during their dessert hours. And I'd always get there, and I'd ask, what's for dessert? And I'd hit 4 or 5 different places at night. I knew, just like the caginess, you know, in the drinking, I knew when people had dessert, and I knew the people that where they bought their dessert. And if they didn't give me enough, I'd buy a pint at Baskin-Robbins on the way home and have eaten the whole thing by the time I got home. I'd come into the rectory and I'd see a prune cake. Have you ever had a whole big prune cake or a pecan pie? And I'd sit there and I'd put it underneath my coat and go up to my room and I'd eat the whole thing, a slice at a time. Just one more, just like it used to be. Just one more drink. I've been compulsive about everything. I've been compulsive about fruit. I can eat 2 pounds of grapes at a time. 2 baskets of strawberries are the best for calories, by the way. Trail mix. The only thing I've ever been cured from is dried fruit. I was on a dried fruit phase at one time of my sobriety, and until one night I ate a whole bag of dried figs, and I've never eaten another fig since. I've been a sports addict, 49er addict. I'll never forget this. Some of you know football. The 49ers beat Dallas about 4 years ago on the way to the Super Bowl. You know, during that game, I drank 24 drinks of Diet Coke and spent most of the key moments of the game in the bathroom. Whenever I watch a sporting event, it's either a love or hate affair. It's life or death. When football season's over, I go through football withdrawals. It's hard for me to find a reason to get up in the morning. If you want a picture of my compulsiveness, the best that I can draw of what I am is what happened to me when I was a vice principal of a high school. We were playing a championship basketball game for the Upper Northern California State Championship, and we were behind by 1 point with 20 seconds left in the game. I'm the disciplinarian for 600 boys. We're behind by 1 point. The man drives for the basket, and we score as the buzzer goes off. The crowd goes wild. The referee called charging. And there I was, if you want a picture of me, in the middle of the floor with my hands around the throat of the referee. But what I've come to discover in my life as I've grown in honesty is I've been compulsive all my life. I've always done things in extreme. It's always been all or nothing. When I was a kid, when we used to collect those baseball cards and we used to throw them against the wall, it used to be that I used to have every baseball card. Or when we collected the bugs in the neighborhood, I wasn't happy. I couldn't go home at night until I had every bug in the neighborhood. I'm compulsive. But the worst for me, the hardest addictiveness and compulsiveness that I've had to deal with in my sobriety is my addiction to people. The need to be needed. That's the terrible. I used to be, when I was a priest in Phoenix, and I used to be like Superman, flying over the city, looking for losers. And as soon as I'd see one, I'd swoop down and grab them. But there was only one problem. I never wanted them to get well. Because if they got well, they didn't need me anymore. So by the time I was finished saving them, I was worse off than they were. But what I'm sharing this with you for is that honesty. This is me. I can be honest with you today about the real person that I am. And that's always been a key of recovery. Honesty. As honest as I can be with myself. I'm going to give you a test on honesty to see how honest you can be with yourself. When you listen to someone you love, somebody that's important in your life, do you listen with an agenda or without an agenda? And what I mean by that is, before you know what to respond or how to answer, do you listen to the whole person? Or while they're talking, are you thinking about what you're going to say? Or what you want to be, what you want them to do. Because you know how that honesty will tell you? It'll tell you how much of a controller you are. How you listen indicates how you control other people. If you were to honestly draw a picture of your face, with your mouth the size of the amount of talking that you do, and your ears the size of the amount of listening that you do, what would you look like? How honest could you be with that picture? See, I came to the point in my sobriety of being able to say that I have never in my life, to that point, ever listened without an agenda. But that was the beginning of me learning how to learn to listen without an agenda. If I didn't have that honesty, I could have never grown. That's how crucial honesty is. And what I'd ask you this weekend is to get in touch with where you're most in pain inside. Not outside, not your husband, not your wife, not your children, but where are you most in pain inside? Be real honest with it. And that's my real purpose here in terms of the personal counseling that I do. That I'll have a list that I'll put up there tonight. And I'll be available all weekend. I'll see anybody that wants to see me. But the reason why I'd like you to wait till you come to see me, till you can get in touch with where you're most in pain. And that's what I'll be there, is to help you grow from that, because that's where God is calling you. Honesty. The second quality is openness. And you know what openness is? Openness is when you listen to your own heart more than any other person or any other institution in the world. An open person is a person who listens to their own heart. God speaks more to us through our own hearts than through any other person or any other institution in the world. And all of you, you'll have a lot of voices in your head. You got voices of your parents, of adults, of religious people, of friends. You have all kinds of voices in your head. And what I ask from you this weekend is whatever I say, listen to see if it makes sense to you in your heart, not in your head. So often, when I do these kind of weekends, people come up to me and say, you've said things that I've known in my heart to be true all my life, but I needed somebody to say them so that I could own them. And so I ask you, listen to your heart this weekend, not to your head. And then I ask that you listen for yourself. We always listen for the most important person in our life. That's why I hate to give couples retreats or spiritual weekends for couples, because I can see the husband looking over at the wife and been trying to tell you that for years, or kind of looking over and saying, I sure hope she heard that. You know, we always listen for the most important person in our life. And so I ask this weekend that you listen for yourself. See, that's part of becoming spiritual, is discovering that we are the most precious person that we're ever going to know in our life. You know, several years ago, I'd say, boy, am I lucky to come up and have such a wonderful group up here. You know what I'd say tonight? You're lucky to have me. Not because I think I'm a good speaker, or not because of any of those things, but because I think I'm a precious person. And that's the key of discovering how precious we are. Learning to listen to our own hearts. And then I ask you, in openness, is listen for what makes you most uncomfortable. Because that's probably what you need to hear the most. You know, it's amazing when I go around and give parish missions and that, you know, the people that aren't there are the people that should be there the most. You know, people that resist things, it's usually because they're resisting something that they most need to hear. So listen to that this weekend. Listen to when I say something that makes you uneasy, that you hope I get off the topic. Or something when you start disagreeing inside. Listen to that. And be open and ask yourself in honesty, is that something that you need to hear before you get mad at me? You know the importance of listening for yourself, and it reminds me of the story of the two older couple. You know, both of them were hard of hearing. And they went into the gas station, and the gas station attendant came up and said, asked them what they wanted. And the wife didn't hear, and she said to her husband, what did he say? And the husband said, he asked us, what do we want? And the wife said, the husband said, what do we want? And the wife said, tell him to fill it up. And so he filled it up, and then the guy started to clean the windows, and he called in, do you want me to clean the windows? And this time the husband didn't hear it. And he asked his wife, what did he say? And the wife said, does he want us to do the windows? Does he want us to have him do the windows? And the husband nodded yes. Well, anyway, the guy did it and checked the oil, and he came around and he leaned on the windowsill and he talked to the old guy. He said, I notice you're from Minnesota. He said, when I was in Minnesota, whenever I see a license plate from Minnesota, I get really upset. Really, it just brings back terrible memories. Because once when I was in Minnesota, I met this woman that was the most bigoted, the most self-righteous, the most angry woman I've ever met in my life. And whenever I see a Minnesota license plate, it reminds me of her. Well, then he went about his work. And the wife didn't hear what he was saying, though. And she said to her husband, what did he say? And the husband said, he met you when he was in Minnesota. We get in trouble when we listen for other people. So I ask you this weekend to really listen for yourself and listen to your own heart. And the last quality I ask is willingness. You know, after all is said and done, much more is said than done. You know, we can have all the honesty in the world. We can have all the openness in the world. But if we don't have the willingness, we can't grow and we can't change. You know how I look at the difference? You know the difference is the difference between trying and doing. I run into people that are always trying to do something, trying to lose weight, trying to quit smoking, trying to let go of people. You know what people are doing when they're trying? They're talking about it. The difference between trying and doing is when we're trying it, we're talking about it, and when we're doing it, we're doing it. And you know, in our culture, a lot of people think their talk is doing it. If we talk about something enough, we're doing it. And the real willingness is when we're willing to do the footwork. When we're willing to walk the way we talk. And that's what I ask this weekend, is for the honesty, the openness, and the willingness. Now, if you want to get in touch with what I'm going to talk about, I'd ask you for a few moments, is place yourselves in your imagination on your deathbed. And ask yourself, what is it that you'd most want to say about your life when that moment comes? Just think for a moment. What is it that you most want to say at that point of your life? You know, I've been alongside a lot of people that have been dying, and I've never heard anybody tell me that they wish they were more handsome or more beautiful, or that they had more money in the bank or lived in a bigger house or were more successful. But you know what I've heard more than anything else? Is people at that point of their life that they wish that they had discovered how really wonderful the gift of life was, how precious they were, and that they had shared it with others. And I believe that desire is deep within each one of us. And I think that's the whole purpose of the 12 steps, is the great desire to become intimate with ourselves and intimate with others. To really discover our own beautiful self and to be able to share it with others. But let me tell you this. We'll never become that person without an inner spirituality. An inner spirituality is not a luxury, it's a necessity if we're ever going to become that person. That's how crucial it is. And I say it for two reasons. The first is this, that life is difficult. You know, when you say, well, most people, everybody knows that. But you know, the truth of the matter is this, that most people have never accepted that truth in their heart. When I listen to people come to me with their problems, they're complaining. Life has been unfair to them. That life should be one rosy day after another. You know, I never knew that life could be difficult until I got sober. The last 10 years have been the most difficult years of my life. Because when I was drinking, my problems were just excuses to drink. And when I got sober, I had to face them. Life is difficult. And that's precisely how we become the best person that we can be, through growing through our struggles and difficulties. Life is difficult, and that's how we grow. You know what happens to people who haven't accepted that truth in their life? When problems come into their life, they run to their comfort zones. See, that's why I think this place is so admirable and why it's so important. They'll take your comfort zones away. You know, sometimes I come up here and I see people with blindfolds on because they don't know how to depend on anyone, or there's no contact. If they find you have a comfort zone, they'll take it away. You know, if I was up here, I wouldn't be allowed to watch television, I couldn't play sports, and I couldn't talk to anyone, and I'd be on a 24-hour blindfold. But you know what they're doing? They take the comfort zones away. See, people that place a high priority on comfort will probably never deal with the truths of their life, because often the truth is not comfortable. And you see, it's losing your comfort zones that brought you here, so you can deal with the struggles and difficulties of your life. Life is difficult, but that's how we grow. And you see, that's the choice we have. Do we grow from our difficulties, or do we build comfort zones? You know, when I go around and give my talks on spirituality, my greatest fear and my greatest challenge is the guy that's sitting there with his arms folded. And you know, maybe he's white-knuckled a marriage for 30 years. He works at a job that he no longer really likes too much anymore. He looks at his kids and he gave them everything they wanted, and now they want everything for nothing. They don't even talk to him anymore. But he's found his comfort zone, and he doesn't want to be disturbed. And I can just see him glaring at me, waiting for me to get over. But you know something? I love the story of Jesus, of the parable of the man with the vineyard. The man went out and he hired some people at the 4th hour, the 6th hour, the 8th hour, and the 12th hour. And at the end of the day, he paid them all the same. It doesn't matter when we discover why we were created, just as long as sometime during life we discover why we were given this beautiful gift. And you see how we discover it is through our difficulties and our struggles. Life is difficult, but that's how we grow. And the second reason of why we need a spirituality is that basically all of us, every one of us in this room, have our weaknesses and our strengths, our successes and our failures. Every one of us has our warts. But you know something? And this is the issue. Either we accept and love that person inside and share it, or if we deny that person, we put all of our energy and our efforts in creating a persona that we show to the world that isn't real. The more that we accept ourselves, the more we share ourselves. The more that we deny ourselves, the more energy and power we spend in creating an illusory self we call a persona. You know what's very interesting that I find in life? Is people's personas, that's what they present to the world, is usually just the opposite of what's inside of them. You know the Archie Bunkers? The guys that have all the answers, that see everything in black and white? Down deep inside, they have no answers. The woman that comes across as assertive and aggressive and wants to control everything, that knows everything, is the most insecure inside. I see that in couples. You know, whenever I see a young couple that are always loving and hugging and kissing in public and all that's going on all the time, I wonder what they're dealing with inside. Are they dealing with the real issues? The more we don't deal with the real issues inside, the more power we give to the external world. I see that in families. You know, where parents, they put all their energy in preparing their children to fit into society, to adjust, to be popular, to be social. And they never deal with the real issues that are going on within the child. See, the more we deal with the person inside, the less power we give to the external. The more we deal with the external, it's because we haven't dealt with the internal. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that's what the choice of spirituality is. Are we going to deal with the real person that we are, or are we going to spend all of our energies presenting a person that isn't us? You know, all of us have our weaknesses. You know, I could stand up here for 2 hours and tell you all my human weaknesses and never even get into the big ones. And I could walk out this door and one of you could say, "Boy, you're long-winded." And I immediately become defensive. Like, you mean you think I have some faults? You know how much energy we give to the world of appearances. And see, the issue of spirituality, are we really going to love that person that we are inside? Or are we going to spend all of our energies presenting a person that isn't us? I'll give you a good indication of this. I'd like you for a moment to think of the person in your life who has tried to own you the most. You know, the person that's put the most pressure on you to be their way. You've had to fear the icy silence or the strained voice. You've had to walk on eggshells. You've had to tell lies just to keep the peace. I'm sure most of us have had at least one of those experiences. I want you to think of that for a minute. Think of how you felt in that experience. How you were a hostage to someone else's needs. How angry you felt inside. I want you to think about it for a moment. Now I'd like you to think of the person in your life who has accepted you the most. A person you could trust your weaknesses to, that you could just be yourself, how easy it was to tell the truth. Hopefully each of us has had such an experience at least once in our life. Now let me ask you the $64,000 question of spirituality that'll indicate to you where you are in your journey right now. Which one of those two are you to yourself? Are you your own best friend? Are you patient and compassionate and forgiving? Or are you your own worst enemy? Are you harder on yourself than anyone else? Are you your most severe critic? And this is so telling. Do you get mad at yourself when you fail, even though in your heart you've known you've done your best? You know, the hardest commandment that Jesus gave us was forgive your enemies. You know, for many of us, we are the enemy. So just honestly ask yourself that question. Are you your own best friend, or are you your own worst enemy? And you know why this is so crucial? Because all of our relationships are mirrors of our own relationship with ourselves. And until we become our own best friend, until we discover that love inside of us, we'll never ever really be able to share it with another person. That's how crucial spirituality is. All of our relationships are mirrors of our relationship with ourselves. And that's the importance of this weekend. And that's what I'll talk about this weekend. You know why most people are not spiritual? They've never been taught how to be. You know, we've been taught how to read, we've been taught how to write, but we've never taught how to be spiritual. It's like me. I'm not very practical. I've never changed a tire. Believe that or not, I've never changed a tire in my life. And I sometimes am driving out on the highway because I do a lot of driving, and suddenly it comes on to me, suppose I get a flat tire now. What will I do? And I dread that day because it's running out. Every day I drive, the statistics get lower that I'm going to have one. And I've never changed a tire. And I don't know what I'll do when it happens. Leave me your number. But you know what? I've gone to my friends. And I've said to them, teach me, show me how to change a tire so that when it happens, I know what to do. And they'll be glad to. You know, I've never done it. You know why? I've never taken the time. And the reason why people are not spiritual is they've never taken the time to be spiritual. So this weekend, what I want to share with you, I can't do it for you, but at least I will share with you how I've worked it in my life, how to become spiritual. And then it's up to you to take the time to work it out in your life. You know how I describe it? It's really simple. Spirituality is developing reactions to our reactions. See, most people live their whole lives on their reactions. Somebody does an injury to me, especially somebody I love, and you know what my reaction is? To get even. I'm an expert at the silent treatment. You know, I can walk by somebody with my nose in the air and pretend like they don't exist, and that's really punishing them. I've never had anybody hurt me that loved me that I didn't want to get even. It's my immediate reaction. Whenever I've had an argument, you know what my immediate reaction is? Is always to be right. I may have many faults, but being wrong isn't one of them. I've never had a reaction to be wrong. It's my immediate reaction. I've never loved anybody in my life that I didn't want to own them, I didn't want to control them, that I didn't know what was best for them. It's always my reaction. You know what spirituality is? Developing a reaction to our reactions. Bringing God into our reactions, and that's what this weekend is about. That's how simple spirituality is. I'll give you some examples. You know, I'm not a rookie anymore. This is my second year of doing this kind of work. But I started out a year ago, this coming December. And do any of you know where Santa Barbara is? Well, I was living in a place called Montecito. And I was driving up to a little town of Lincoln, California. And there's a place, Casa Grande. Do you know where that is along Highway 101? Well, there's a steep mountain, and you come up, and then you come down this steep grade. And suddenly I saw a police car behind me. You know, one of those moments when you don't want to look guilty, but you want to know what he's going to do, so you're trying not to look at him, but you're watching him through the mirror. And I looked at my speedometer, and I was going 60 miles an hour, and I couldn't figure out why he was behind me. Well, the light went on, and he pulled me over. Oh, I hate those guys. You know, they come up to you like they've never gone over 55 in their life, like they're Boy Scouts. And they came up to me, and he said, I clocked you going down the mountain. It was a steep grade. I clocked you going down the mountain at 63 miles an hour. And I looked at him, and I said, yeah. And he said, but I'm going to be nice to you. I'm going to give you a ticket for going 60 miles an hour. So he wrote me this ticket for going 60 miles an hour in a 55-mile zone. Well, you know what my reaction was? You know what I wanted to do? I wanted to take the gun out of his holster and shoot him. Especially when I was standing there, he's writing out, or sitting there, he's writing out the ticket to me, and all these cars were speeding by me going 70, and I was getting a ticket for going 60. I was just furious inside. It was just grinding up inside. It was just the unfairness. You know, I felt victim. Well, then he left. You know, he proudly got up and drove off, and there I was sitting in the car steaming. And I started thinking, I want to just show you a difference between a reaction and a reaction to a reaction. I started thinking, you know, I go over 65 quite a few times. In fact, you know what I like to do? I like to get in a caravan of trucks and stuff and get in the middle and figure they can't give us all a ticket. You know, if they go up to 80, I'll get right in there. And I'm an expert at looking at the overpasses, you know. And I started to look at it and said, you know, it's a game out there. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And this time I lost. But I won a lot of times. And I smiled and drove off. But it's a simple example of the difference between a reaction and a reaction to our reaction. Well, I went up and I gave that first mission up in Lincoln, California. And then I had 4 days off before I had to give 8 straight ones. And I went up to Tahoe to do a little skiing and a little gambling. I love the poker slot machine. I don't know if any of you have ever discovered them. But I've been able, and this is really alcoholic behavior, I've been able to sit in front of a poker slot machine for 10 straight hours, the same machine, drinking coffee and orange juice and never having the desire to go to the bathroom for 10 straight hours. That's a love affair. Well, anyway, I was playing, I was putting in the 5 quarters, and I had one left. And I put in the 1 quarter, and lights went on and bells, I got a royal flush. I won $62.50. You know how much I would have won if I had 5 quarters in? $1,500. And you know, everybody was congratulating and looking over, and I was just fuming inside. And you know what made me even angrier? Because my pockets are always full. I dug down into my pockets. You know what I found? I found 6 more quarters in the bottom of my pocket. Well, you know, I had 4 days up there, and I was just so filled with anger and rage inside. You know, I wish you could have killed a machine. You can't kill a machine. And so I started thinking. You know, I don't know if any of you have ever been to any of those places, but if you have, there are people that watch people put quarters in, and then as soon as you move away, they move right in. Well, you know, suppose I would have stood there and would have gotten up and left and watched somebody scoot in right behind me and put 5 quarters in and win $1,500. I wouldn't be here tonight. I'd be in a mental hospital. It could have been worse. And then I started to think, you know, it's not bad. You put a quarter in and you win $62.50. You know, it's a lot better to win than to lose. And you know, I started getting grateful. And I went to seek the friends that I was with, and I went and I told them that I won $62.50. I never told them I lost $1,400. But those are simple examples. But what is spirituality all about? Spirituality is developing a reaction to our reactions, bringing God into our reactions. And that's what I'm going to talk about this weekend, is how to develop an inner spirituality. It's simple, but it's not easy. You've got to do the footwork. You know, I believe that the only tragedy that can ever happen to any one of us is if we die and we never become the precious person that we are. It's the only tragedy that can happen to us. Because you know, of all the billions of people that have ever walked this planet, there's only going to be one you and one me. And what a tragedy if we never become that person. A horse will always die a horse, and a cow will always die a cow. But there's no guarantee that when we die, we have ever become the beautiful person that we are. It has to be our choice. And that's what this weekend is about. God bless you. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. I'd like to begin this morning with where it all begins in at least the Jewish Christian tradition in the first chapter of Genesis. It talks about man being created in the image of God. And the language, it's very important of what is meant by that language, because it doesn't mean statue or picture or something outside. It means we're created in the personality of God. That each of us possesses God. That we carry God within us. And it talks about the scriptures, about the law of love being written in our hearts. And with Jesus, when he came to preach the kingdom within. And you see, part of all of what I'm going to talk about this weekend is getting God out of space and putting him into a process, into something that's inside of us, not something out there. You know how I like to understand it? Is when we talk about God, in the old medieval notions that when I was raised as a Catholic, we talked you had to have soul. You know, the soul was black or white, it was spreckled, and it went up and down, whether you went to heaven or hell. But I like much more the notion of the blacks when they say you got to have soul. All of us have soul. We know, each of us, that we're much more what's inside of us than what's outside of us. But then there comes that question, is if we're created in God's image, why are we in such a mess? You know, people have asked me, is it difficult being a celibate priest? Is it difficult not being married? You know how I've answered that? I've known many, many marriages in my lifetime, and there's so few that I'd like to be part of. You know, I was in a talk show. I was on a talk show in Phoenix. Oh, must be 5, 6 years ago, and this man was interviewing me because I had done a lot of marriage counseling. His name was Mike, and I can never forget that moment. He was interviewing me on the radio, and he asked me about marriage, and I said, Mike, how many marriages do you know that you'd like to be part of? And there was this long pause, and he said, my God, I can't think of one. I recently had an experience of a doctor who had a large family, 8 or 9 kids, and he came to visit me, and all the kids had moved out of the house, and he was there with his wife, and he said, you know, we don't even know if we like each other anymore. But he said, before I even deal with that issue, we both know so many people. How many of these people, these married couples, do we know that are enjoying the journey together? that really love being married and are growing in the experience. And you know, we spent an hour and a half talking about the different couples we knew, and we came up with 2 older couples that we thought were really enjoying the gift of marriage. You know, I look at families, and whenever I find a family that works, and when I mean a family that works, a family where they really listen to one another, where they really are thoughtful of one another, where they really treat each other like they're precious. You know, I want to run around the neighborhood, and I want to run around and say, wow, I found one. But you know, most of the families I know, they eat, they drink, they sleep, and they watch television together. You know, families could be so much more than what they are. And so, you know, in my life, and I speak with great honesty, is I've had a deep question for many years. Does God really exist? Is there really a God? Or if God exists, has He played a terrible trick on us? Has He created us out of His love, given us a command to love one another, and then made it almost impossible? Or are we doing something wrong? It's been a question on my mind for many years. And I think I have the answer. It comes, if I can explain my response to that, is to the story of Adam and Eve. Remember that story? It talks in the Old Testament that they had everything their hearts could desire. It even talks about that they walked with God in the evening. They had such a relationship with God. But then this serpent comes along, and you know, this God told them only one thing. He said, don't eat of the tree of good and evil. And the serpent comes along and says, why don't you eat of the tree of good and evil? You know what's amazing about that story? If they had such a good relationship with God, why didn't they ever ask Him why He didn't want them to eat of the tree of good and evil? Did you ever think about that? Why didn't they ask? Instead of listening to the serpent. And you know how I see that in our lives? The Adam and Eve inside of each one of us? Is we listen to the external world, all the conditioning that goes on upon us, all the forces to make us what others want us to be, and we never learn to listen to our own hearts. That's what I talk about, listening to the serpent, and never learning to listen to our hearts where God speaks most intimately to us. And I want to talk about that for a few moments. See, each of us has something in us that prevents us from listening to our hearts. And it's called the disease of denial. That's what prevents us from going inside. And all of us, every one of us in this room, has a denial system. And if you want to get in touch with your denial system, and that's why a place like this is so beneficial. There's Survivors Week, for example. Is if you want to get in touch with your denial system, you have to go back to your childhood, because that's where it begins. And so you ask yourself the question, when I was a child and I was growing up in my family, did I really deal with the real issues inside? Did I listen to what was happening to me inside? Or did I deny what was going on? Because that's where it begins. And I'd like to share with you my experience and what I've come to discover about my denial system. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was a bar drinker. And I can remember back to when I was 3, 4 years old, and I used to go to bed at night in terror of whether the garage door was going to open at night, because then I knew he was home. And I tossed and I turned in my bed, and there were many a nights when he never came home. And I remember the times when he did come home, and my mom and dad would have a fight, and they'd not talk to each other, and it'd go on for weeks and sometimes months. The terrible pain. The pain of the tossing and turning in bed, but the terrible pain as a child to live in a home where there was so much tension when your parents never spoke to each other. It was a terribly painful experience. My mom didn't drive, and I remember going with my father as a family when we go to occasions, and I know he'd drink, and then I know we'd have the drive home. I remember, I'll never forget once, somehow he was drinking, and we got on a dirt road that was a fire road. And he was drunk, and we drove up this narrow dirt road to a dead end, and it was sheer cliff on the side, and there was no place to turn around. And I can still remember my terror as a child, having my drunk father driving us backwards down this steep grade. All this terrible pain, all this fear of being abandoned that was in my childhood. And then I remember, I was terrified of bringing friends home after 6:30 at night because my dad was in such a stupor. My childhood was a terrible experience. It was very, very painful. But the amazing thing is I never talked to anybody about it. I never paid any attention to it. I denied it. It was like having a big white elephant in the front room that was always there, but nobody ever talked about it. You know how I dealt with all that pain as a child? I was the oldest. I became responsible. I thought that if I got A's, that the family problems would clear up. Or if I worked hard, if I was successful, if I made the football team, the problems would be solved. So what I did is I became responsible. That's how I solved the problem. I went outside instead of inside. And so I grew up with 4 rules that were the basis of my denial system. I didn't feel. I denied my feelings. I didn't communicate. Since I didn't know my feelings, I couldn't communicate them. And I didn't trust. Because my mom and dad were not there for me. And so I learned very early not to trust anybody, to deal with everything deep inside of me. It's very interesting in our family how each one of us learned our own appropriate denial system, our own unique way of listening to the serpent. Each one of us did something different to solve the problems, but it was always something that we went outside ourselves to do it. My sister became the placater. Her job was to make everybody happy, to keep the peace. Things will get better. Tomorrow it'll get better. That was her solution. My brother, he became the adjuster. My brother could adjust to anything. My brother, what he could do is he could be in the middle of Siberia in the worst storm that Siberia has ever had. And he would be happy if he just had the sport page. Nothing phases him. He can adjust to anything. That's how he solved the problem. And my younger sister, she was the one, she acted it out. She became the problem. She'd get caught drinking at the dance, and my father would go down and bail her out with the good nuns, and he'd come home and have a few drinks and think to himself, my God, with a daughter like that, anybody would need a drink. She acted it out. But what I want you to notice, that each one of us in our family, we all denied what happened to us inside, and all developed an appropriate external behavior that we thought would solve the problem. And now I want to show you how strong this denial system is. Several years ago, and my dad today has been sober now for 25 years, and he had a surgery. He's been in AA for 25 years, a marvelous program. When he came out of surgery, they gave him Percodan and Valium. And there he was in his hospital bed, just like he was 25 years ago. My dad, whenever he reached that point of being drunk, he'd sit there with glassy eyes and say to anybody that he saw, "Who did you ever beat?" There he was in the hospital bed as we came to visit him, looking at us with those glassy eyes, asking us, who did we ever beat? But what was amazing was every one of us in the family acted out just like we did 25 years ago. I became responsible. I went to the doctor and talked to everybody and tried to solve the problem. My sister, she went around and told everybody, it's going to get better, don't worry about it, nothing's wrong. My brother, he just sat there and watched the sports and read the newspaper and didn't bother him. And my sister, she put on a tantrum and she suddenly became the problem. That's how deep our denial system was. 25 years later, All of us were right where we were. We were right back where we were 25 years ago. Isn't that amazing? And my mother, she thought it was the anesthesia for 4 days, the Al-Anon. And when she discovered that it wasn't, she blew her top. You know what's so neat? And my family, in terms of understanding this, of me using, and they've all have come and thanked, because we've grown tremendously as a family through this disease. And I'll share some of this during this weekend. But you know, they've all come and thanked me for using them because it's helped so many other people to grasp in their own family. You know, when you give it away, you grow. But what I wanted to point out, very importantly, is we have to get in touch with our denial system, because that's what prevents us from listening to our hearts. Now, I want to take this a step further now. I want to take this journey. We come out of our childhood, and where do we go? We go into adolescence. And that's the time in our life when the serpent is most strong. You know, all the peer pressure, the pressure to be cool. Look at our young people. How much energy do we spend on how we appear externally versus how we take care of what's happening to us inside? You know, how much more time do we spend in front of the mirror than we spend in what kind of a person we are? You know, by the time a student is a junior in high school, he will have watched 350,000 commercials that will have told him that if he buys this product, he will find happiness. If you use this toothpaste, you will find the girl of your dreams. If you drive this car, you will be the perfect person. We've been conditioned to listen to the serpent. You know how it really struck me? I had an experience as a vice principal that really taught me how much in our culture we are conditioned to listen to the serpent. I was a vice principal, and as teachers would send their students out for me to punish them, and they tell me suspend the kid or kick him out, but as I always listened to the students without an agenda. I never had a set lecture. That was a great gift that God gave me in working with young people, and I'd always been successful with that age group. But I always listened before I responded. And you know what I often found? I often found that maybe their parents were getting a divorce, or their mother or father had a drinking problem, or the kid had been beaten the night before. And my job as vice principal was to punish the student. And I thought to myself, how much in our culture that we listen to the external person and we never listen to what's going on inside. And that's true in our families, that's true in our churches, that's true in our schools, that's true in our workplaces. And we're treated this way ourselves, and then when we get in positions of authority, we do that to others. How much we're conditioned to listen to the serpent. And I want to take this a step further now. All of this denial that we developed as in our childhood, and we bring through our adolescence, we bring to all our adult relationships. You know, I've done many years of marriage counseling, and I'm convinced in most marriage problems, as in most relationship problems, it has nothing to do with the relationship, but each person is making a scapegoat of the other person for the issues that they've never worked out in their lives. You know what scapegoating is? Scapegoating is putting the light on someone else so we don't have to look at ourselves. And if we haven't worked these issues out inside of ourselves, we're going to take them out on the people that we love the most. And for me, that's the meaning of the root of evil. How can good people do evil things? How can good parents do evil to their children? By projecting onto the children the issues that they've never worked out in their lives. How do teachers do it to their students? How do priests do it to their congregations? By putting on other people the things that we've never worked out in ourselves. It's the root of evil. You know, it's so important to grasp the meaning of that, because it's so crucial as we confront and deal with our denial system and how important it is. And you know what I see today, which is a great opportunity, especially for you people here, the opportunity you're having. I think that this listening to the serpent has been passed on in families from generation to generation. It's been in your parents' family and their parents' family, and they've continued the conditioning from generation to generation. But you people have the opportunity to break the chain, to create something anew, to break through that conditioning. And I think that's a tremendous gift, to bring real honesty into what's going on in your lives. But you know, even beyond what happens within the families, we've got to look at what happens in our culture. How we're so much conditioned to listen to the serpent. You know why people used to be educated, why people went to school? They went to school for the liberal arts, for the humanities. People went to school to become better human beings. You know why people go to school today? So they can make a lot of money. You know what runs families? The economic system. You know, husband and wives, they spend the worst parts of the day with each other. In the morning when they're rushing, and at night when they're tired, and they save their best energy for strangers. How do people determine the life, the flow of the family? The economic system. How do people vote? The economic system. They vote we're told to vote our pocketbooks. We're conditioned to listen to the serpent. You know, there's a movie, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it says exactly what I'm saying. Have you seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy? Any of you have seen it? It's a great movie. I really recommend it. But it's about this beautiful tribe in Africa of natives, and they're loving life, they're dancing, and they're caring for each other, and they love the joy of life and being together. Till one day a plane comes overhead, and a Coke bottle falls out of the plane. And they think the Coke bottle's from the gods. And they discover that they can use the Coke bottle for a lot of different uses. You know, they can grind their food, they can fix things, but there's only one Coke bottle. And so what happens is they start fighting about that one Coke bottle. And pretty soon people aren't talking. There's a lot of turmoil in the tribe. So the chief makes a decision. He's got to return the Coke bottle to the gods because it's destroying the tribe. And he takes the Coke bottle back to civilization. And he watches people. He looks at families and how they interact and marriages. He looks at how people deal with each other in business, how we deal with the poor. And he goes back to his tribe. And you know what his closing conclusion is? The gods must be crazy. We've been conditioned to listen to the serpent. We've been conditioned to be what the external world has made us, instead of ever learning to listen to our own hearts. And I want to even kind of sum this up in a spiritual way. I've spent my whole life pleasing other people. My whole life. Trying to get other people to love me. From God right on down. And you know what I've come to discover? That from God down, everybody wants me to be perfect. You know, the God that I had as a kid was a God that gave me a good angel. It was said a good angel. And you know, my good angel had a notepad with him. And he wrote down all the wrong things that I did. And at the final judgment, he was going to read it out in front of everybody. And I can remember as a kid saying, my God, someday everybody's going to know about me. And then they had for me this purgatory. That if I didn't do something bad enough to get me to hell, no matter what I did bad, I'd get punished in purgatory. Oh, they gave me indulgences. I could work some of my time off, but my purgatory, my indulgences could never keep up with my purgatory. But I want you to notice the other side of the coin. If God gave me this angel and God had this purgatory, it means that God expected me to be perfect. When I wasn't perfect, He wasn't loving me. He was punishing me. And you know what the phenomenon is? People become the God they worship. All the people in my life, all the significant people worship that God. And so all of them put on the same expectations to me that God had on them. All the people in my life didn't know how to deal with human weakness except to punish it. Whenever I wasn't perfect, that meant there was something wrong with me. You know the whole root of shame, where it develops, and I was certainly a product of it when I was a kid, is when I did something wrong. It wasn't that I did something wrong, I was something wrong. That's how I was treated, from God right on down. And you know, I can remember the kind of God that they gave me. They told me the story of Adam and Eve, that because Adam and Eve sinned, that meant that I would get sick and die. If Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, that would have never happened. And I remember thinking as a little kid, boy, God is still punishing me for what they did. And then when they told me when I went to school that if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, that I wouldn't have to go to school, then I got resentful because I hated school. But what I want you to notice, the kind of God that enforced this perfection. And I can remember as a kid all those painful moments that when I did something wrong, and I didn't mean to do something wrong, how guilty I felt and how guilty I was made to feel. We had a beautiful front room. My dad was in the furniture business. And it was kind of one of those forbidden land for kids. Kids never go in the front room. It's for adults. Well, somehow when I was 4 or 5, I got in the front room and I knocked over the inkwell onto the carpet. Well, I wasn't spoken to for a week. I didn't mean to do it. I remember the first time I tried to serve Mass. And I got the Latin mixed up, and the nun slapped me. Those kind of experiences of being punished because I wasn't perfect. And so you know what happened to me from my earliest years? I developed what I call my shadow. That part of me that if anybody knew about it, they wouldn't love me. My secret self. And I developed it inside. It was my secret from my God, and it was my secret from others. Even as I stand before you this morning, I have a shadow. I have a part of me that if I think you knew about, none of you would be sitting here. My shadow. But I was a good Catholic, and I knew that God never missed anything. And I thought that when I died, I'd get just what I deserved. In fact, during the Korean War, when we had such that fear that we were going to be bombed by the Russians, I was never afraid of the Russians coming and bombing me and me dying. I was always afraid the Russians coming and bombing me and I'm dying and then I go to hell. Because I felt so trapped. I was conditioned. I was conditioned to listen to the serpent. The external world controlled me. And I never learned to listen to my own heart. That was my state of being when I came to this program. And I want to share with you the greatest sentence that I've ever heard in my life. And it helped me get out of the cave. When I came to this program, I don't know whether it was the first or the second meeting, but I heard those words that I was sick and not evil. And those are the greatest words that I've ever heard in my life. And they made all the sense in the world to me, because I could never understand in my life how someone who was a 4-point student, who was so successful in so many areas, that saved a high school once that was going down, who developed new programs, who did so many accomplishments, I never understood how such a person in a blackout could hold a gun on his sister and brother-in-law. I couldn't understand how a person who tried so hard to be good could run down the middle of Santa Cruz naked at 4 in the morning. It didn't make any sense. My life didn't make any sense, and I didn't know what was wrong. You know, I tried harder to be good when I was drinking than I do today. And I kept messing up. You know, my life, if I thought something would make me good, I became a priest to be good. When I was a kid, I'd go to church all the time and confession to be good. I read books. I went to a psychiatrist. I did self-help programs. I did anything in the world to be good. And it just got worse. And I couldn't understand it. I thought I was trapped. I thought I was trapped as a loser. You have to feel trapped when you've tried so hard to be good. But when I heard those words, that I was sick and not evil, that opened my eyes, that gave me hope. I understood it immediately. I understood it with my heart. It explained everything. And it was such a relief to know I had a disease. And I could have a recovery program. Because I'll never forget that last week of drinking. You know, I've been a person who could always work, and they say men's greatest fear is the fear of failure. And you know, whenever I drank, I could always at least say that I was working hard. And it was always my justification. But I'm one of those, you know, the 4 P's: pride, perfection, procrastination, paralysis. Pride, I've got to do everything myself, and not only do I have to do it myself, but I have to do it perfectly. Procrastination, I'll put off anything I can't do perfectly till tomorrow, and then paralysis about it. Well, you know what for me was one of my issues was paperwork. I hate detail work because it requires such perfection, and I always find a way. And I'll tell you, I had 7, any of you ever fill out financial aid forms for students? I had 75 I had to fill out. And you know, one mistake and the computer rejects it. I had transcript evaluations, all kinds of detailed work, and it was piled up on top of my desk. And I'd never been a binge drinker in my life. I just drink in the evenings in my closet. You know what I did that last week of drinking? I took the telephone off the hook because they were expecting all this paperwork. And this farmer that I knew gave me this huge big vat of homemade wine. At least God gave me the gift. It was the best wine I've ever tasted, and it was my last. And I sat in my room, the phone off the hook, and drank for a whole week. And that was my last week of drinking. I couldn't work anymore. I had really become powerless. And you know, I'll never forget the blessing when I hit my bottom to know that it was a disease. It opened the door. But I want to share with you how I've come to understand that disease. See, I came to this program, I was a con man. You know what? I had to become a con man. You know, people always told me I had so much potential. Oh, did I hate that word? I heard it from everybody. Oh, you've got so much potential whenever you get your life together. I was a people pleaser. So take a person with a lot of potential that always got to please people and with no self-confidence that I could never accomplish it. So I learned the shortcuts to do everything. I could write a magnificent book on how to be a 4-point student without ever studying. I learned how to do everything without doing it. I was a con man. But I was forced to be a con man because I had to discover how to accomplish things without ever doing it, because I never had the confidence I could do it. My conscience? I didn't have a conscience when I was at this program, when I came to this program, because you know, when you're trapped where you are, I didn't have a reason for why I was. So I couldn't feel guilt. I couldn't allow myself to feel guilty because I couldn't do anything about it. And you know, when I came to this program, I could justify everything in the world. It started when down in Phoenix at Brophy, I was a border prefect. I always say that in order to make amends, I'm going to have a few oil wells come in. But anyway, it started out, my justification, I was a prefect for 65 borders, like mother and father, and I'd take care of them and all that. But I'd go into their Coke machine. They had one of those Coke machines, and I'd go in and get handfuls of quarters. And I'd go up to the liquor store and pour the handfuls of quarters on and find out how much gin I could buy. But I justified it. If the kids knew how hard I worked for them and how much that this would help me work for them, they'd approve of it. You know what I did when I was a vice principal in a high school? Because a closet drinker, it costs money. You know, booze costs money, and I don't get a salary. How do you pay for it? You know what I did? I instituted a speeding limit in the parking lot of 15 miles an hour and a $5 fine if you went over it. And you know, whenever I needed money, I'd go hide behind a car, and I'd have $40 in 10 minutes. I could justify anything. That denial system, because I didn't know what was wrong. And you know, I'll tell you how strong that denial system was in me, and that lack of conscience. There was a young fellow that my dad had helped get on the program, and he'd come to see me, and he wanted to share with me what my dad had helped him and how much the program was helping him. This was 2 weeks before I got sober, before I hit my bottom. And we went out to lunch, and I'll never forget, we sat there and he shared with me all the disease and his recovery, and I sat there and toasted him with two drinks, with 2 scotches, telling him how happy I was for him, and it never dawned on me for a moment that I might be an alcoholic. 2 weeks before I got sober. That's how much of a denial system and a lack of conscience I had to this program, when I came to this program. But I want to share with you how I understand this disease. You see, I believe I was born with it. I was born compulsive. As I said last night, I've never done anything moderate in my life. But I've never asked to be compulsive. I'd love to be moderate. In fact, I remember I gave a workshop over our Jesuit novitiate on the 12 steps. And one of the novices came to me, and after listening, he said, "Boy, I wish I were an alcoholic." And I looked at him, and I said, "You don't know what you're asking for. If you had my personality and my compulsiveness, you'd be in a mental hospital in a week." You know, I haven't asked to be compulsive. I never chose it. I believe I was born that way. But you know what happens naturally to a compulsive person because we're so powerless over our compulsions? We become self-centered. We develop strong wills. And when I want something, I'll go through a cement wall to get it. And nothing else matters. So compulsiveness naturally leads to self-centeredness. In fact, I define the disease of alcoholism as compulsive self-centeredness. But there's only one major problem with that. You know what I hate more than anything in the world? Selfishness. The lowest blow that I can ever say to anybody when I really want to get them between the eyes is to tell them, "You're just being selfish." In fact, I've known people that I've liked, and suddenly I discover how selfish they are. You know, when you discover it in a person, you can see it in their mannerisms or the way they walk, and I don't like them anymore. I hate selfishness. So I move from compulsiveness to self-centeredness to self-hate. And when I came to this program, I was filled with self-hate. And I can remember in my last week of drinking, when I was there with my sister, and it's the only time I've ever articulated it. See, last night I mentioned we create a persona that's just the opposite of what's inside of us. And you know what my mechanism was? The more things were miserable and the more miserable I felt inside, the more I presented an image that everything was all right. And I never shared it with anybody, but I remember my sister, she told me, she said, "Tom," she says, "you're doing such wonderful work and people love you so much." She always looked up to me as her older brother. And it's the first time I ever articulated it in my life. A week before I got sober, I said, "Sue, I'm the ugliest person I know inside. I'm a cesspool inside." And that's how I felt about myself. I felt that I was a totally evil person because I was so selfish. And when I came to this program and I discovered that I was sick and not evil, I understood it immediately. That was the greatest sentence that I've ever heard in my life. It was the beginning of my spiritual awakening. It was the beginning of my being able to deal with the real person that I was. And that's what I want to share with you this weekend, is how this journey has progressed. I want to talk about how I have come to discover with guilt and turn them into gratitude, how to turn fears into faith, and how wonderful this gift has been to me. I say today with so much meaning and depth, I'm such a grateful alcoholic because it's given me a beautiful way to live. Let's stand and say the Lord's Prayer.